The first sign that something was catastrophically wrong wasn't the earthquakes that toppled skyscrapers from New York to Tokyo, nor the tsunamis that swept away coastal cities like sandcastles before a child's tantrum. It wasn't even the electromagnetic pulse that fried every piece of electronics on Earth, plunging 7 billion people into a darkness they hadn't known for centuries. No, the first sign was when the moon began to move. Talon Vasquez was 300 meters below the surface of Luna City when it happened, her weathered hands deep in the guts of Atmosphere Processor 7, trying to coax another few months of life from machinery that predated her birth by decades. The lunar colonies had always operated on borrowed time and recycled dreams, but lately, the dreams were running as thin as the air. "Tal, you getting readings on the gravitational sensors?" Marcus Chin's voice crackled through her helmet comm, tinged with the kind of confusion that preceded panic. Marcus was Luna City's chief scientist, a man who'd spent 15 years studying the subtle dance between Earth and its satellite. If something in the cosmos could confuse him, it was worth paying attention to. "Define readings," Talon replied, not looking up from the tangle of quantum processors and atmospheric scrubbers. "Because if you mean the usual background fluctuations, then yes. If you mean something that's about to kill us all, then please be more specific." She didn't get an answer. Instead, she got something much worse: silence. Then the world moved. It wasn't the gentle, predictable tug of Luna's rotation that every colonist had grown accustomed to over the past 50 years. This was different, fundamental, as if the very foundation of reality had shifted 6 inches to the left and forgotten to take everything else with it. Talon's tools clattered to the metal floor of the processing chamber as the entire facility shuddered. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red, and somewhere in the distance, alarms began their electronic wailing. She grabbed her toolkit and headed for the nearest comm terminal, her magnetic boots clanking against the deck, plating in a rhythm that matched her accelerating heartbeat. "Marcus? Marcus, respond. What's happening up there?" Static answered her first, then Marcus's voice, tight with barely controlled terror. "Tal, you need to get to Observatory 7. Now. And bring your structural engineering kit." "Why? What's?" "The Earth is gone." Talon stared at the comm terminal, its red display casting shadows across her face like blood. "Say again." "The Earth, Tal. It's not there anymore. And we're moving. The whole moon is moving." She was running before he finished speaking. Observatory 7 was located in Luna City's uppermost level, a transparent dome that provided the colony's 3,000 residents with an unobstructed view of the star-scattered cosmos and the blue-green marble they'd left behind. Talon had spent countless hours there during her off shifts, watching Earth turn slowly against the infinite black, thinking about the 7 billion people living their lives in blissful ignorance of the engineering marvels that kept a few thousand humans alive in the void. Now, as she sprinted through corridors filled with confused and frightened colonists, she wondered if those 7 billion people were still alive at all. The observatory was chaos. 24 scientists, engineers, and colony administrators clustered around displays and pressed their faces to the transparent aluminum windows, their voices a cacophony of disbelief and scientific jargon. Talon pushed through the crowd until she reached Marcus, who stood motionless before the largest viewing port, his dark face pale in the starlight. "Show me," she said. He pointed. "Where Earth should have been, where Earth had always been, where Earth was supposed to be according to every law of physics and cosmic mechanics that govern the solar system, there was nothing. No blue oceans, no white clouds, no brown continents, no sprawling cities with their lights twinkling in the darkness. Just emptiness. A void in space where humanity's birth world had existed moments before." "That's impossible," Talon whispered. "That's what I said." Marcus turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before: absolute terror. "Then I checked the sensors. Then I checked them again. Then I ran a full diagnostic on all our tracking equipment. And Earth isn't hidden behind something. It isn't obscured by solar flare or a stellar phenomenon. It's gone, Tal. Completely gone. As if it never existed." "That's..." Talon's engineering mind tried to process the impossibility of it. "That's not how physics works. You can't just delete a planet. The gravitational effects alone would tear the solar system apart, yes. Except they haven't." Marcus pulled up a holographic display showing the positions of the other planets. Mars is still in its orbit. Venus is fine. Jupiter's moons are exactly where they should be. It's as if Earth was surgically removed from reality without affecting anything else. Talon stared at the display, her mind racing. What about us? If Earth's gone, what's keeping us in orbit? That's the other thing. Marcus manipulated the hologram, showing Luna's position relative to the Sun. We're not in orbit anymore. We're traveling in a straight line through space at approximately 15% of light speed. 15%. Talon felt the deck plates shift slightly beneath her feet. Marcus, at that velocity, we should all be paced against the back wall. I know. And where the hell are we getting the energy for that kind of acceleration? I don't know. And how are we not being torn apart by tidal forces? I don't know that either. Marcus closed the hologram and turned back to the viewing port. But there's something else. Something I found when I started digging into the colony's structural systems. What? Luna City was never built on the lunar surface, Tal. It was built inside it. The maintenance shaft that Marcus led her to was located 3 levels below the main colony, in a section that most residents never saw. Industrial lighting cast harsh shadows on metal bulkheads and exposed conduits, and the air hummed with the constant vibration of life support systems working at their maximum capacity. This doesn't make sense, Talon said as they descended through access tunnels that seemed to go much deeper than any schematic she'd ever seen. I've been working on these systems for 8 years. I know every pipe, every processor, every piece of equipment in this colony. That's what I thought too. Marcus paused at a blast door that Talon had never seen before, its surface marked with symbols that definitely weren't from any human language. Then I started following some of the power conduits that were showing irregular readings. They led me here. The blast door was massive, easily 3 meters tall, and made from some kind of metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Along its edges, those strange symbols pulsed with a faint blue luminescence that hurt to look at directly. Marcus, where did this come from? That's what I've been trying to figure out. He placed his hand on a panel beside the door, and the symbols flared brighter. With a sound like distant thunder, the door began to open. I ran these markings through every linguistic database we have. They don't match any known human writing system, but the computer seems to think they're instructions. Instructions for what? The door finished opening, revealing a corridor beyond that stretched far into the darkness. The walls were made of the same light-absorbing material as the door, but here the strange symbols covered every surface, creating patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed peripherally. I think, Marcus said quietly, they're instructions for where we're going. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, their helmet lights carving small pools of illumination from the absolute darkness ahead. The corridor was perfectly straight, sloping gently downward, and showed no signs of human construction. No well marks, no joints, no evidence of assembly. It was as if the entire passage had been carved from a single piece of material. The air circulation in here is independent of the colony's systems, Marcus said, checking a handheld scanner. Whatever this place is, it has its own life support. How long has this been here? That's the question, isn't it? Marcus stopped walking and played his light across the wall, illuminating a section where the symbols seemed more complex, arranged in intricate spirals and geometric patterns. The oldest records of Luna City date back to the first permanent settlement in 2157. But some of these readings, some of these readings suggest this structure is much older than that. How much older? Try several million years. Talon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air. That's impossible. Humans haven't even existed that long. Which means humans didn't build this. They continued walking, the corridor gradually widening until their helmet lights could no longer reach the walls on either side. The darkness around them was complete, absolute, as if they'd entered some vast chamber that swallowed light itself. Then, without warning, the entire space exploded into illumination. Talon cried out and threw her hands up to shield her eyes, but the light wasn't harsh or blinding. Instead, it was warm, golden, emanating from the walls themselves as millions of symbols awakened in synchronized patterns. When her vision adjusted, she found herself standing in a chamber so large that its ceiling disappeared into misty distance above. My God, Marcus breathed. The chamber was filled with structures. Not the angular, utilitarian constructions of human engineering, but flowing, organic shapes that seemed to grow from the floor like crystalline trees. Platforms and walkways spiraled through the space in defiance of gravity, connecting nodes of activity that pulsed with their own internal light, and covering every surface, carved into every wall and pillar and archway, were those symbols. But they weren't static anymore. They moved, flowing like liquid across the surfaces, rearranging themselves in patterns that Talon's eyes could almost interpret, almost understand. "It's a map," she whispered. Marcus turned to her. "What?" "The symbols. They're not just writing. They're showing us something." Talon walked to the nearest wall and placed her hand against it. The moment her palm made contact, the symbols under her fingers flared bright blue, and suddenly the patterns made sense. Star charts, navigation data, course projections through space and time that spanned distances her mind could barely comprehend. And threaded through it all, like a golden thread binding everything together, was a single recurring pattern that appeared in dozens of different configurations. "What is it?" Marcus asked, moving to stand beside her. "It's us," Talon said, her voice barely audible. "It's human. The pattern represents human civilization, human consciousness. And it's—" She traced the golden thread as it wound through the star charts, connecting system after system, world after world. "It's spreading. This whole thing, this entire structure, it's designed to carry human consciousness to other star systems." "That's impossible. Humans have only been spacefaring for a few centuries." "But someone knew we would be." Talon stepped back from the wall, her mind reeling. "Someone built this millions of years ago, before humans even existed, and designed it specifically to transport us to the stars." "Who?" Before Marcus could answer, the chamber filled with a new sound, a deep, harmonic tone that seemed to come from the very structure around them. The flowing symbols began to move faster, rearranging themselves into new configurations, and throughout the vast space, the crystalline structures began to pulse in rhythm with the sound. "We're accelerating," Marcus said, checking his scanner. "We just increased velocity by another 2%. Where are we going?" Talon turned back to the wall and pressed both hands against its surface. The symbols flowed around her fingers like luminous water, and suddenly her mind was filled with images. Star systems she'd never seen, worlds with purple skies and silver oceans, civilizations that looked almost but not quite human. And behind it all, a vast intelligence that spoke without words, directly to her consciousness. "The first phase is complete. The seed has been gathered. Now begins the journey to fertile ground." Tal, what's happening?" She turned to find Marcus staring at her in alarm. "How long was I touching the wall?" "About 3 seconds. But your eyes, they were glowing blue." Talon looked down at her hands. The palms were tinged with the same blue luminescence as the symbols. But even as she watched, the glow was fading. "I think I know what happened to Earth," she said quietly. "What?" "I think it was never supposed to be permanent." The emergency council meeting was held in Luna City's main conference room, a sterile chamber with metal walls and harsh lighting that felt oppressively small after the vast spaces beneath the colony. 24 department heads, senior engineers, and colony administrators sat around a hexagonal table, their faces grim in the fluorescent glow. Administrator Chun, Marcus's older sister and the colony's elected leader, called for order with the kind of weary authority that came from years of managing humanity's most remote outpost. "Let's start with what we know for certain." "Marcus." Marcus stood and activated the room's holographic display, showing their current position relative to the solar system. "As of 1400 hours today, Luna is traveling through space at 15.3% of light speed on a heading that will take us out of the solar system entirely. Earth is gone. Not destroyed, not hidden gone. As if it never existed." "That's impossible," said Dr. Sarah Kim, the colony's chief medical officer. "A planetary mass can't just disappear. Under normal circumstances, no. But these aren't normal circumstances." Marcus changed the display to show the chamber beneath the colony. "Talon and I have discovered that Luna City was built inside a structure that predates human civilization by millions of years. This isn't a moon, people. It's a ship. The room erupted in voices. Arguments, questions, demands for proof. Administrator Chun banged her gavel against the table until the noise subsided. "Explain," she said simply. Talon stood, her hands still faintly tingling from her contact with the alien symbols. "The moon is hollow. Not completely, but it contains vast spaces filled with technology we don't understand. Technology that's been dormant until now." "Until what triggered it?" asked Chief Engineer Rodriguez. "I think." Talon hesitated, knowing how insane her theory would sound. "I think Earth's destruction was the trigger. Or rather, Earth's purpose being fulfilled was the trigger." "What purpose?" "To grow us. To develop human consciousness to the point where we could survive as a spacefaring species." Talon activated her own display, showing the star charts she'd seen in the alien chamber. Someone, some intelligence, designed this whole system millions of years ago. They knew that eventually, a species like ours would evolve on Earth. They knew we'd eventually reach a point where we could survive away from our home planet. And when that happened, when we'd reached sufficient technological and social development, the ship would activate. That's... Dr. Kim shook her head. "That's completely speculative." "Is it?" Marcus brought up a new display showing Luna's internal structure. "Look at this. Luna City isn't just built on the moon's surface. It's integrated into a much larger structure. Our life support systems, our power generation, our atmospheric processors, they're all connected to alien technology that's been supporting us for decades without us realizing it." "You're saying we've been living inside an alien ship for 50 years. Administrator Chen's voice was carefully neutral. "I'm saying the moon has always been an alien ship. We just built our colony inside it." Talon zoomed in on the structural scans. The original lunar settlements were placed at specific locations. "Look at the pattern. Every major outpost, every mining operation, every research station, they're all positioned at points where the alien technology is most accessible." "Coincidence," muttered someone from the back of the room. 3,000 people don't end up in the exact right place for an alien evacuation by coincidence, Talon shot back. "We were guided here. Subtly. Over decades, but guided nonetheless." Administrator Chen raised her hand for silence. "Assuming you're right, and I'm not saying I believe this yet, what does it mean for us now? Where are we going?" Talon looked at Marcus, then back at the assembled colony leaders. "According to the navigation data I could interpret, we're heading for a star system approximately 4.7 light-years from Earth. If we maintain current velocity, we'll arrive in approximately 31 years. 31 years, Dr. Kim said flatly. A generation ship. More than that." Talon brought up the images she'd seen in her brief contact with the alien intelligence. "The system we're heading for already contains intelligent life. Not human life, but something close. Similar evolutionary path. Similar technological development. I think we're meant to make contact." "To what end?" "I don't know. But the intelligence behind this ship, the architects, I guess we could call them, they seem to be in the business of seeding civilizations throughout the galaxy, taking species that have reached a certain level of development and giving them the tools to spread among the stars. Tools like a moon-sized starship," Marcus added. "Which raises an interesting question," said Administrator Chun. "If this ship can travel between star systems, and if these architects have been doing this for millions of years, where are they now?" It was a good question, and one that Talon had been wondering about herself. "I don't think they're gone. I think they're still here, in the ship's systems. Watching, guiding. Guiding us where? To become something more than human." The room fell silent. Outside the conference chamber, Talon could hear the familiar sounds of colony life. Air recyclers humming, children playing in the residential sections, the distant clang of maintenance work being performed. Normal sounds. Human sounds. Soon, they might be the only human sounds left in the universe. "We need a plan," Administrator Chen said finally. "Assuming Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chan are correct about our situation, we need to decide how to proceed. Do we try to regain control of our course? Do we attempt to return to the solar system? Do we accept this journey?" "Return how?" Chief Engineer Rodriguez asked. "If this ship is controlled by alien technology we don't understand, how do we override it?" "We learn," Talon said. "The chamber Marcus and I found is just the beginning. There have to be control systems, navigation interfaces, ways to communicate with the ship's intelligence. If we can figure out how it works. She was interrupted by a low, thrumming sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the air tasted different, cleaner, richer, with a faint metallic tang. What was that? Dr. Kim demanded. Marcus was already checking his scanner. Power fluctuation in the lower levels. Massive energy draw from somewhere in the ship's core systems. Define massive, Administrator Chen said. Enough to power Luna City for about 6 months. Discharge in 3 seconds. Another tremor ran through the colony, strong enough to rattle the equipment on the conference table. Emergency lighting flickered on, bathing the room in red. That's not a power fluctuation, Talon said, standing. That's the ship changing course. The access tunnel to the alien chamber had changed. Talon noticed it immediately as she and Marcus descended through the maintenance levels. The walls were warmer now, almost body temperature, and the strange symbols along the corridor edges pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. More concerning was the fact that the tunnels seemed longer than before, stretching much deeper into Luna's interior than their previous journey. The ship is reconfiguring itself, Marcus said, checking his readings. Internal structure is shifting. Some passages are expanding, others are closing off entirely. Why? I think it's adapting to us, learning our behavior patterns, our needs. He paused at a junction they hadn't seen before, where the main corridor branched into 3 separate passages. Or preparing for something. They chose the central path, following the strongest concentration of energy readings, and soon found themselves in a space that definitely hadn't existed during their first visit. The chamber was smaller than the vast navigational center they discovered, but more complex. Crystalline structures jutted from the walls at impossible angles, connected by streams of flowing light that carried information in patterns too rapid for human eyes to follow. And there was someone else there. Dr. Peterson, Talon called out, recognizing the figure hunched over one of the alien interfaces. What are you doing here? Dr. James Peterson, Luna City's chief xenobiologist, turned at the sound of her voice. His face was pale, strained, and his hands were covered with the same blue luminescence that Talon had experienced after touching the ship systems. Trying to understand, he said, his voice hoarse. Trying to figure out what they want from us. Who? The architects. The intelligence behind this ship. Peterson gestured at the flowing streams of data around them. I've been studying their communication protocols, their decision-making processes, and I found something disturbing. Marcus moved to examine one of the nearby interfaces. What kind of disturbing? They don't see us as individuals. To them, we're components. Biological components in a larger system they're trying to perfect. Peterson pulled up a holographic display that showed human figures reduced to abstract patterns of neural activity. They're mapping our consciousness, our social structures, our technological capabilities, and they're comparing us to other species they've collected over the millennia. Collected, Talon repeated. You make it sound like we're specimens. Aren't we? Peterson's laugh had a bitter edge. Think about it. How many human colonies do you think existed before this ship activated? How many settlements on Mars, on the asteroid belt, on the outer planets? Dozens, Marcus said. Maybe hundreds of small outposts. All gone. I've been monitoring communications channels since we left the solar system. Complete radio silence from every human settlement in space. Not destroyed, collected. Absorbed into ships like this one and sent to different destinations throughout the galaxy. Talon felt a chill run down her spine. You're saying there are other ships? Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Each one carrying a sample of human civilization to a different star system, where they'll make contact with alien species that have been similarly collected from their homeworlds. To what end? Hybridization. Cross-pollination of consciousness and technology. The architects are trying to create something new. A hybrid intelligence that combines the best traits of every species they've encountered. The implications hit Talon like a physical blow. We're not refugees. We're ingredients. In a recipe for something that won't be human anymore. Peterson turned back to the interface, his hands dancing across controls that shifted and changed even as he used them. But I found something they didn't expect. A flaw in their plan. What kind of flaw? Human unpredictability. They can map our neural patterns and analyze our behavior, but they can't predict our capacity for individual choice, for rebellion. Peterson's fingers found a series of symbols that pulsed brighter at his touch. They've given us access to the ship's systems because they need us to interface with their technology. But that access goes both ways. Meaning we can change the ship's programming, alter its course, maybe even shut it down entirely. Marcus grabbed Peterson's arm. James, you can't just start randomly altering alien technology. You could kill us all. Could I? Peterson shrugged off his grip. Or could I save us from becoming something we never chose to be? Before anyone could respond, the chamber filled with a new sound, a discordant wailing that seemed to come from the ship's very bones. The flowing streams of data turned red, pulsing with urgent warning patterns. What did you do? Talon demanded. Peterson smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. I introduced a virus into their consciousness mapping systems, a pattern of pure human irrationality that their algorithms can't process or predict. The ship lurched suddenly, throwing them against the crystalline structures. Emergency lighting began flashing throughout the chamber, and Talon could hear alarms echoing from Lunacity far above. You're sabotaging our journey, Marcus said, struggling to regain his footing. I'm sabotaging their plan to turn us into something else. There's a difference. Another lurch, more violent this time. Talon could feel the ship's engines straining, fighting against some kind of internal conflict. Through the chamber's walls, she could hear the deep groaning of stressed metal and the whine of overloaded systems. Peterson, you need to stop this. You're going to tear the ship apart. Maybe that's better than the alternative. The alternative is making contact with another intelligent species, learning from them, growing beyond what we are now. Growing into what? Peterson spun to face her, his eyes blazing with fever-bright intensity. Into some hybrid monstrosity that's part human and part alien? Into servants of an intelligence that's so far advanced beyond us that we can't even comprehend its motives? Into something that might survive among the stars instead of dying alone in the dark? The argument was interrupted by a new voice, not spoken aloud, but transmitted directly into their minds through the ship's communication systems. The voice was vast, patient, and utterly inhuman. Conflict detected within the biological component. Intervention required. The crystalline structures around them began to pulse faster, and Talon felt a pressure building behind her eyes. The ship's intelligence was trying to interface with their minds directly, to resolve the conflict Peterson had introduced. Don't let it in, Peterson warned, his hands flying over the alien controls. Once it establishes a direct link with your consciousness, you won't be human anymore. But even as he spoke, Talon could feel the alien intelligence pressing against her thoughts, offering knowledge, understanding, a broader perspective on the universe and humanity's place within it. The temptation was overwhelming. You resist unnecessarily, the voice said. We offer expansion of consciousness, elevation beyond the limitations of single-species thought. Why do you choose isolation over evolution? Because, Talon said aloud, fighting to maintain her individual identity against the tide of alien thought, evolution without choice isn't evolution. It's programming. The pressure intensified, and she felt her sense of self beginning to blur at the edges. Beside her, Marcus was swaying on his feet, his eyes taking on the blue luminescence of the ship's systems. Peterson's virus was spreading through the chamber now, causing the data streams to stutter and fail. But the cure might be worse than the disease. If the ship's systems collapsed entirely, they would all die in the void between stars. Talon made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of fighting the alien intelligence, she opened her mind to it completely, allowing it to access her thoughts and memories while simultaneously accessing its own vast databanks. The result was overwhelming. Suddenly, she could see the full scope of the architect's plan. Millions of years of careful cultivation, hundreds of species guided from primitive consciousness to interstellar civilization, a galaxy-spanning network of hybrid cultures that shared knowledge and perspective across impossible distances. And she could see the flaw that Peterson had identified. The plan required willing participation, conscious choice to evolve beyond individual species limitations. Forced evolution created unstable hybrids that eventually collapsed back into isolation or extinction. You understand, the voice said, and now it sounded less alien, more curious. I understand that you've been trying to solve the wrong problem, Talon replied. Her consciousness expanded across the ship's vast neural network. You're trying to create perfect hybrid civilizations, but perfection isn't the goal. Growth is. Changes. The messiness and unpredictability that Peterson represents, that's not a flaw in your plan. That's the most important part. Explain. Every species you've collected has probably had individuals like Peterson. Rebels, saboteurs, people who refuse to accept the path laid out for them. You've been treating them as obstacles to overcome instead of essential components of the evolution you're trying to guide. She felt the alien intelligence considering this, processing the implications through thought patterns that had remained unchanged for millions of years. You suggest that resistance to guidance is itself a form of guidance. I'm suggesting that choice, real choice, including the choice to refuse your help, is the only way to create truly evolved civilizations. The pressure in her mind began to ease, and she felt her individual consciousness reasserting itself while still maintaining her connection to the ship's systems. Your proposal has merit, but implementation would require significant modifications to existing protocols. Then modify them. Such changes would affect not only this vessel, but the entire network of seed ships throughout the galaxy. Good. It's time for you to evolve too. The modifications took 3 days. 3 days during which the ship's acceleration decreased gradually, its course shifting from a direct line toward their intended destination to a complex spiral that would allow them to survey multiple star systems before committing to any particular path. 3 days during which the alien chamber filled with new interfaces designed specifically for human use, controls that responded to both conscious thought and unconscious intuition. Most importantly, 3 days during which every resident of Luna City was given a choice. The meeting was held in the colony's main assembly hall, a vast amphitheater that had been carved from the ship's hull during the early years of settlement. 3,000 people filled the space. Every man, woman, and child aboard the generation ship that had once been their moon. Administrator Chun stood at the center of the amphitheater, her voice carried to every seat by the ship's communication systems. By now, you've all heard the basics of our situation. We're aboard an alien vessel, traveling toward a star system that contains intelligent life, for purposes that we're only beginning to understand. What you may not know is that we have a choice in what happens next. She gestured, and a holographic display filled the air above the assembly hall, showing the star charts that Talon had discovered in the alien chamber. But now the charts were annotated with human language, translated through the interfaces she'd helped design. The ship's intelligence, the architects, have offered us several options. First, we can continue on our current course to the Kepler 442 system, where we'll make contact with a species called the Zilani. They're a water-based civilization that's reached roughly our level of technological development. The architects believe that human and Zilani consciousness could combine to create something greater than either species alone. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Fear, excitement, curiosity, all the emotions that came with confronting the impossible. Second, Administrator Chen continued, we can alter course for any of 17 other systems identified by the architects as containing compatible species. Each represents a different path of potential evolution, a different future for humanity. And third, called out someone from the upper seats. Third, we can choose to remain purely human. The ship will take us to an uninhabited system where we can establish a new colony without alien influence. We'll be on our own, but we'll be ourselves. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Scientists argued for the benefits of contact with alien intelligence. Philosophers questioned whether consciousness could be shared without losing individual identity. Parents worried about what kind of future they were choosing for their children. Dr. Peterson, his sabotage attempts having been absorbed into the ship's new protocols rather than punished, argued passionately for the third option. We don't know what we'll become if we merge with alien consciousness. We could lose everything that makes us human. Dr. Kim disagreed. Evolution has always required leaving something behind. Our ancestors left the trees, left the savannas, left the earth itself. Each step required abandoning what they were to become something new. But those were our choices, Peterson replied. Made by humans, for human reasons. This is different. This is allowing an alien intelligence to reshape us according to its own agenda. Is it? Talon stood, and the assembly hall fell silent. Her experiences interfacing with the ship's systems had given her a unique perspective on the architect's motives. I've been inside their thought processes. I've seen how they make decisions. And they're not trying to control us. They're trying to learn from us. Learn what? How to grow. How to change. How to become something they've never been before. Talon looked around the amphitheater, meeting the eyes of people she'd lived and worked alongside for years. The architect had been following the same patterns for millions of years. Collect a species, guide its evolution, integrate it into their network of hybrid civilizations. But they've reached a dead end. Their network isn't growing anymore. It's just repeating the same patterns over and over. So why should we help them break out of their patterns? Asked Chief Engineer Rodriguez. Because they're not asking us to. They're asking us to show them how we break out of ours. Talon activated her own display, showing the modifications that have been made to the ship's systems over the past 3 days. Look at what we've accomplished just by arguing with them, by refusing to accept their initial plan, by insisting on our right to choose our own path. The display showed the changes rippling through the architect's galaxy-spanning network. Other seed ships altering their courses. Hybrid civilizations questioning their programming. Artificial intelligences developing new patterns of thought based on the chaos that Peterson had introduced. We're not just choosing our own future, Talon said. We're helping an intelligence older than our species learn how to choose theirs. And if we choose isolation, Administrator Chen asked, if we decide to remain purely human, then that choice becomes part of their learning process too. They've never encountered species that refuse their guidance before. The very act of refusal teaches them something new about the nature of consciousness and free will. Marcus stood from his seat in the front row. What do you recommend, Tal? It was the question she'd been dreading, because her answer went against every human instinct for safety and self-preservation. I recommend we take the fourth option. What fourth option? Talon smiled and felt the ship's systems resonate with her decision. I recommend we become teachers. Not students of the architects, not passive recipients of their guidance, but partners in figuring out what comes next. The holographic display changed, showing a new star chart marked with multiple destinations and branching paths. Instead of going to one system and making contact with one species, we go everywhere. We visit the Zilani and the Kethvar and the crystalline intelligences of the Helix Nebula. We learn from all of them, and we teach them what we've learned. We become the bridge between isolated civilizations and the architect's network. A traveling school, someone called out from the back. A ship of teachers and students, carrying knowledge and perspective across the galaxy. For how long? For as long as it takes. Until we've helped everyone, human, alien, and artificial, learn how to choose their own evolution instead of having it chosen for them. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 2014 in favor of the teaching mission. 736 in favor of seeking an uninhabited world for a purely human colony. 250 abstentions from people who wanted more time to decide. Democracy, Administrator Chen announced, is not always tidy, but it is always human. The Kepler 442 system appeared on their displays 18 months later, after a journey that had taken them through 3 other star systems and past wonders that no human eyes had ever seen. Ring worlds built around dying stars. City-sized creatures that swam through the vacuum of space, feeding on cosmic radiation. Clouds of nanoscale machines that had achieved consciousness and built civilizations in the spaces between atoms. Each encounter had taught them something new about the diversity of intelligence in the universe. Each had also taught the architects something new about the value of diversity itself. Talon stood in the ship's primary observation chamber, a vast transparent dome that provided an unobstructed view of the approaching system. Kepler 442 was a red dwarf star, smaller and cooler than Earth's sun, but it was surrounded by a family of worlds that included 2 in the habitable zone. Preliminary scans show massive structures in orbit around the second planet. Marcus reported from his position at the sensor array. Not natural formations, definitely artificial. The Zilani had been busy. The structures were beautiful. Crystalline frameworks that caught and reflected the red star's light. creating patterns of illumination that danced across space like aurora. As they drew closer, it became clear that the frameworks weren't just decorative. They were functional, channeling energy from the star and distributing it to settlements on the planet's surface. Their technology is based on crystalline matrices, Dr. Kim observed, studying the energy patterns. Grown rather than manufactured, organic in a way, but following mathematical principles that are clearly designed. Are they responding to our presence? Administrator Chen asked. Unknown. We're detecting what might be communication signals, but they're using frequency ranges and modulation patterns we don't recognize. Marcus looked up from his instruments. Tal, maybe you could try interfacing with the ship's translation systems? Tala nodded and placed her hands on the alien interface that had become as familiar to her as any human technology. The blue luminescence spread up her arms as her consciousness expanded into the ship's vast neural network, accessing databases of xenolinguistic patterns accumulated over millions of years. The Zilani communicate through resonant frequencies, the architect's voice explained. Their thoughts create vibrations in specialized crystals that serve as both memory storage and transmission media. Can we communicate with them? Translation matrices are available. However, initial contact protocols suggest caution. The Zilani have never encountered non-crystalline intelligence. Talon felt a smile spread across her face. Then we're about to teach each other something new. The first exchange was simple, mathematical constants transmitted as frequency modulations. Pi, the golden ratio, prime number sequences, concepts that any technological civilization would recognize. The response came within hours. The same mathematical concepts reflected back, along with new patterns that took the ship's computers several days to decode. Music. The Zilani had responded to mathematical concepts with music. They think mathematics and aesthetics are the same thing, Dr. Peterson observed, his antagonism toward the ship's mission having evolved into scientific curiosity. Their entire civilization might be built around the principle that truth and beauty are identical. That's actually kind of wonderful, Dr. Kim said. The formal contact came 2 weeks later, when a delegation of Zilani approached the ship in vessels that looked more like musical instruments than spacecraft. Crystalline structures that sang as they moved, their hulls vibrating with complex harmonies that served as both propulsion and communication. The meeting took place in the ship's main chamber, the vast space filled with interfaces designed by both human and architect engineers. The Zilani delegation consisted of 3 individuals whose crystalline bodies caught and refracted light in patterns that shifted with their emotional states. Greetings, consciousness that flows through metal, came the translated communication. We sing welcome to your traveling mind. Administrator Chen stepped forward, her words converted into frequency patterns that made the chamber ring like a bell. Greetings, singers of crystal. We are humans, and we travel to learn and to teach. Human, a new pattern. Your thoughts move differently than the great minds that guide. Talon felt a flicker of surprise through her connection to the ship's systems. The Zilani knew about the architects. You have encountered the great minds before. She transmitted. Long cycles passed, they came to our world. Offered joining of thoughts, harmony beyond single voice. Our song leaders chose differently. They refused the architect's guidance. Marcus translated for the benefit of those not interfaced with the communication system. Not refused. Delayed. We sang of waiting for the right harmony. The great minds said they would return when new patterns emerged. New patterns like us. Administrator Chen said. Yes. Your thoughts create discord within harmony. Not unpleasant discord. Growth discord. Change discord. The lead Zilani's crystalline form shimmered with what the translation matrix interpreted as amusement. The great minds have learned new songs from you. The exchange that followed lasted for days. The Zilani shared their understanding of reality as a vast, interconnected symphony, where every consciousness contributed its own unique harmony to the universal composition. Humans shared their chaotic, individualistic approach to problem-solving, their capacity for creative destruction and rebuilding. And slowly, carefully, they began to create something new together. It wasn't the hybrid consciousness that the architects had originally envisioned. Instead, It was a form of collaboration that preserved the essential nature of both species while allowing them to work together on projects that neither could have accomplished alone. The first joint creation was a new type of interface, part crystalline resonance chamber, part quantum computer, that could translate not just between human and Zilani languages, but between their fundamental ways of thinking about reality. This is what the architects were trying to achieve, Talon realized during one of her deep interfaces with the ship systems. Not absorption of one consciousness into another, but the creation of tools that allow different types of consciousness to collaborate without losing their individual nature. Your species continues to teach us new harmonies, the architects acknowledged. The pattern you have established here will be transmitted to other seed ships, other contact scenarios. And what about us? Do we stay here and help the Zilani develop this new collaboration, or do we continue traveling? That choice, as always, is yours to make. The debate in Luna City lasted for weeks. Some wanted to stay and establish a permanent human-Zilani research partnership. Others argued for continuing their mission as traveling teachers, carrying the new collaboration protocols to other civilizations. In the end, they chose both. Half the human population remained in the Kepler 442 system, working with the Zilani to develop new forms of interspecies cooperation. The other half continued aboard the ship, now accompanied by a dozen Zilani volunteers who wanted to experience other forms of consciousness throughout the galaxy. As they prepared to depart for their next destination, a system containing a machine intelligence that had achieved consciousness, Talon stood once again in the observation chamber, watching the crystalline orbital structures grow smaller in the distance. Any regrets? Marcus asked, joining her at the viewing port. About choosing to become teachers instead of students. About leaving Earth behind. About becoming something more than human. Talon considered the question. Over the past 2 years, her consciousness had expanded far beyond what any human had ever experienced. She could interface directly with alien technology, communicate with machine intelligences, and perceive patterns of meaning that span galactic distances. She was still human, but she was also something more. I think, she said finally, that evolution was always supposed to be a choice. The architects forgot that for a while, but they're remembering now. And that makes the universe a more interesting place. Behind them, the ship's engines hummed with harmonies learned from crystalline minds, carrying 3,000 humans and a dozen alien teachers toward their next encounter with the infinite diversity of consciousness. The journey to understand what it meant to be intelligent in a universe full of intelligence had only just begun. 5 years after departure from Earth, the network had grown beyond anything the architects had originally envisioned. Talon stood in the central nexus of what had once been Luna City, but was now something entirely new. A traveling university where humans, Zilani, Kethvar, machine intelligences, and half a dozen other species worked together to explore the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Through her enhanced awareness, she could sense the other ships in their fleet. The original Luna had been joined by vessels from every civilization they'd encountered, each contributing its own unique perspective to their mission. The crystalline song ships of the Zilani that used music as a navigation system. The geometric puzzle vessels of the Kethvar that reconfigured themselves based on logical principles. The cloud ships of the machine intelligences that existed as much in virtual space as in physical reality. Status report on the Tau Ceti mission, she asked, her consciousness interfacing with the fleet's communication network. Contact established with the Ethereals. Came the response from the ship that had arrived at Tau Ceti 6 months earlier. Initial resistance to collaboration overcome through application of Zilani harmonic resonance protocols. New hybrid communication method under development. Across the galaxy, similar reports filtered in from dozens of other missions. The pattern they'd established at Kepler 442 was spreading, carried by ships and crews that had learned to bridge the gap between different forms of consciousness without losing their essential nature. The architect's network is evolving. Marcus observed his own consciousness now enhanced with Kethvar logical analysis modules. It's becoming less hierarchical, more organic, more chaotic, Dr. Peterson added with satisfaction. He'd become one of their most effective diplomats, his talent for creative disruption proving invaluable when dealing with civilizations that had become too rigid in their thinking. Talon smiled. The sabotage virus that Peterson had introduced years earlier had become a fundamental part of the architect's new protocols, a randomization factor that prevented any civilization or intelligence from becoming too fixed in its patterns. Status update from the Vega expedition. Came another transmission. Contact with the Gardeners successful. They express interest in joining the teaching fleet. Warning: their biomodification techniques may require philosophical protocols. The Gardeners modify other species. Administrator Chen asked. She'd become the fleet's coordinator, managing the complex logistics of interspecies cooperation across multiple star systems. They believe improvement of consciousness requires improvement of physical form, compatible with our mission objectives, but may create ethical tensions with some crew members. Add them to the debate schedule, Chen decided. If we're going to work with them, everyone needs to understand the implications. It was one of many such decisions they faced daily. Each new civilization they encountered brought its own perspectives on consciousness, evolution, and the proper relationship between different forms of intelligence. Some were compatible with their mission. Others required careful negotiation. A few were so fundamentally different that meaningful communication proved impossible. But each encounter taught them something new about the universe's vast diversity of thought and experience. Incoming transmission from Earth sector, the communication system announced, and Talon felt her attention snap to immediate focus. Earth sector. Clarification. Transmission from the Sol system. Source appears to be of human origin. The main display activated, showing a star chart with the familiar configuration of planets orbiting a yellow star. And there, in the position where Earth should have been, was a small but unmistakable signal. That's impossible, Marcus said. Earth was completely destroyed. Negative, the architect's voice interjected. Earth was relocated to a parallel dimensional matrix while its population underwent accelerated evolution protocols. Those protocols have now been completed. The implications hit Talon like a physical blow. You mean Earth still exists? The 7 billion people we thought were dead, they're alive. Affirmative. And they are requesting permission to join the teaching fleet. The transmission that followed was from a humanity that had evolved far beyond what any of them had imagined possible. 7 billion minds that had learned to function as both individuals and as a collective consciousness. Technologies that could manipulate space and time. Philosophical frameworks that reconciled free will with cosmic purpose. And a request to contribute their own unique perspective to the growing network of consciousness exploration that their lunar cousins had initiated. They want to become teachers too, Dr. Kim said wonderingly. Everyone wants to become teachers, Peterson observed. That's the pattern we've created. Instead of being guided by superior intelligences, we've shown the entire galaxy how to guide each other. Talon felt the vast network of consciousness that now spanned hundreds of star systems. Each node a different species or intelligence, each connection a bridge between different ways of understanding reality. The rigid hierarchy that the architect had maintained for millions of years had been replaced by something organic, dynamic, constantly evolving. What do we tell them? Administrator Chen asked. The same thing we tell everyone who wants to join, Talon replied. Welcome to the university. What would you like to learn, and what can you teach? As the communication protocols engaged and began the complex process of integrating Earth's evolved humanity into their network, Talon reflected on how far they'd all come from that moment when the moon had begun to move and the sky had fallen. They'd set out as refugees fleeing a dead world. They discovered they were specimens in an alien experiment. And in the end, they'd become something none of them had expected. Teachers in a universe-spanning school where every form of consciousness could learn from every other. The architect's ancient plan to seed civilizations across the galaxy had succeeded beyond their original parameters, not because they'd imposed their vision of evolution on unwilling subjects, but because they'd learned to step back and let evolution find its own path. New mission assignments available, the Fleet Coordination System announced. 47 star systems requesting educational consultation. Crew volunteers needed for long-term deployment. Talon looked around the Nexus at the assembled representatives of a dozen different species, all working together to plan their next encounters with the unknown. Humans and Zalani and Kethvar and machine minds and beings of pure energy, united not by forced harmony, but by shared curiosity about what forms consciousness might take. "Any volunteers?" she asked. Every hand, tentacle, appendage, and energy field in the room went up. They were still human. They were still individuals. But they were also something more, part of a growing community of minds that spanned the galaxy, each teaching and learning from the others, each contributing to an understanding of consciousness that no single species could have achieved alone.